Good morning, everybody. Hello and welcome to another eMobility Roundtable in association with Mercedes-Benz Trucks and Motor Transport. Hopefully you all enjoyed that little welcome video there. I'm George Barrow, Deputy Editor of Commercial Motor and a contributor to Motor Transport, and I'll be your host for the session where my guests will be talking about the ecosystems around electric vehicles. In our first eMobility Customer Roundtable in March, the panel discussed the electrified products options available on the market. But today's roundtable will focus on eMobility infrastructure and we'll be hearing from a range of fleet operators from a variety of different sectors. The Transport Decarbonisation Plan sets out what government, business and society will need to action in order to deliver significant emissions reductions. The plan aims to put the UK on a pathway to achieve UK carbon emission targets and lower emissions across every mode of transport by 2050. Road transport will play its part in lowering its outputs, and under consultation, sales of new diesel trucks below 26 tonnes will end in 2035, and sales of heavier diesel vehicles will be stopped from 2040. Of course, getting there is going to require investment, and not just in new vehicles. Without a charging infrastructure, operators will be reluctant to commit to new vehicles, and without foresight of new vehicles coming to market and a clear uptake to operate them, the investment in infrastructure simply won't happen either. There's potential to be a real chicken and egg situation, but thankfully all parties are making progress, and the Transport Decarbonisation Plan will underline the timeframe to which we will all work towards. Today we're going to hear from all the stakeholders in this fast-moving story. But first off, we will start with an introduction from Wolfgang Tyson, Mercedes-Benz Trucks UK Managing Director. Good morning, Wolfgang.
Good morning. Thank you. Thank you, George, for kicking us off. And yes, we pulled that first introduction video from our world premiere, which we had the other week, where we had a lot of participants around the world. It was on the last the Wednesday, the 30th of June, and maybe some of you have joined us in this. Maybe also some have joined us in the first virtually discussion roundtable, which we had also 2 months ago, where we introduced, as George said, the vehicle as such and the idea of e-mobility. Today, we think about now going into a second round and adding a very important topic about e-mobility into our discussion, with a circle here of experts and customers around us. And it's about the infrastructure which is needed to operate those trucks going forward. And as you can see in my back, we truly at Daimler Trucks worldwide, we believe in e-mobility. We believe that this will be the start into a new area, and the infrastructure will be as important as the truck itself. And this is why today we are going to host the second round with our experts. And George, maybe back to you, and you could introduce our experts, which we have today around us.
Absolutely. Thank you, Wolfgang. So up next and doing a little presentation for us will be Dee Humphreys, Managing Director of Engie EV Solutions, and Jonathan Goose, Regional Director for EVBOX UK and Ireland. Good morning, Dee. Good morning, Jonathan.
Hi. So thanks for having me. A little bit about who we are first. So I work for Engie. We're a global services and energy provider. And very recently, Engie split into two parts. Engie, which stays as Engie and focuses on energy. And Equans, which is a new entity, part of Engie, that focuses on service. Now, Equans operates across 17 countries, 74,000 employees, and focuses predominantly on the 6 areas you can see at the bottom of the screen there. And my business, EV Solutions, sits in that Equans division. EV Solutions specifically operates all of Engie's charging infrastructure works within the UK. We own and operate our own rapid public charging network with more than 450 rapid chargers across the UK currently. That makes us the 5th largest rapid charging network in the UK at present. And we use the expertise we get from owning and operating our own network to consult with other businesses on their transition to electrification of fleet. And we provide a full service right through from consultation to provision of hardware and installation, and then a 24/7 customer support model. We've worked with a number of customers, and you can see a selection of them here. In some cases, we've rented land for them and we've funded the charging infrastructure on site, giving us great locations for our customers to charge at and driving footfall into their areas. And for others, we've worked with them to consult to either help them electrify their fleet or to provide charging infrastructure at their workplaces for their employees to make use of so they can support their zero carbon ambitions. I'm sure Benoit and Jonathan and everybody will talk a little bit more about this partnership later on, but I wanted to pull out just a couple of key facts. So we formed a pan-European partnership that is unique here. Each of us are experts in our fields, and we've come together to provide a full turnkey solution to help fleets and businesses transition across to zero carbon and electric transport. The commonality that I see between all of the partners involved here is our commitment to excellent customer service, our expertise in our field, and our ability to deliver at scale. Now, making this jump can feel a bit daunting. So you want to buy an electric truck, what next? How are you going to do everything else that comes with it? And the point of this partnership is to help you on every step of that journey, not just with the truck purchase. So at a high level, this is how it works. We go through the analysis phase, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in my coming next slides. We'll then come to your site and we have a look at the location, try and see what's the suitable location for it, what groundworks you might need, talk through your options. Whilst we're there, because we benefit from the broader energy background, if you've got other conversations you want to have around solar or battery feasibility, we can introduce that at that stage. We'll then provide you a quotation for the works, which will have installation site plans, and it's a fairly detailed and transparent quotation. And subject to you being happy with that, we can go ahead and do the install. However, given the scale of the infrastructure that most of you on this call are going to be looking at, the bit I'd really like to stress is that you can't start these conversations early enough. So the longer you give us to get to know your business, your aspirations, your plans, your future growth strategy, the better the solution we will collectively come up with for you will be. And then there are some mundane timeline things to factor in, like equipment lead times, network connections, and civils and groundworks. So it's never too early to have that conversation. In terms of the analysis, thank you EVBOX for this graphic, by the way. This is an example of sort of journey we'll go on with you in terms of the conversation. I won't read it out verbatim, you'll be pleased to hear, because you'll get a copy of this through with your follow-up pack. However, there are a few key points that I think occasionally people miss when they're thinking about charging infrastructure and this journey, and I do want to pull those out. So your available grid capacity at site is really important. I think if you've not got enough electricity, getting to it. So what we'll do is work with you to understand what capacity you've got at your locations and what you need to do to increase it if necessary. So we can help you with DNO network connections, we can help you with substation installation. There's a lot we can do to make sure that the equipment you bring in operates at peak. How long you intend to be at your site is really important as well. We've had customers come and speak to us and we go through the whole process and then we find out they're relocating in 3 years. Well, infrastructure is a big expense. It's one of those things that you really need to make sure you're building into your strategy. So when we're talking to you, we will ask you, what is your 5 to 10 year plan? Are you looking to grow where you are, in which case we'll help you future-proof your installation? Or are you looking to relocate, downsize? Do you want to remain flexible? In which case we'll help you balance your investment against your future plans. Driving behaviour is really important. Jonathan will talk about this a bit more in a minute, but at a very simple level, if you've got trucks that are going to sit in the depot overnight, you can have a slower charger, a cheaper charger, and leave it there to charge and be ready in the morning. But if you're running your fleet for maximum productivity and minimal downtime, then we'll talk to you about higher powered chargers that will get you back on the road faster. And we'll also want to talk to you about criticality of infrastructure. So should the worst happen, something goes wrong, we want to make sure we've got the right support package in place for you so that we can get the support you need when you need it and get you back on the road exactly when you need to be. And I've included a really quick summary slide here because it can be quite complicated. Just these are the key themes that when you start this conversation and you start this thought process that you may want to consider. I'm sure I don't need to point out cost to any of you as a consideration. I'm fairly sure that's front and center for every one of us. But just to remember things like the battery size of the vehicle you've chosen, the maximum charging speed, your capacity at site, and what we call dwell time. So the amount of time that vehicle is physically stationary and therefore can be charged for. So the takeaway from me today is that it can be complicated, but we're here to help. And it is never too early to start the conversation. And in fact, having a conversation up front can help you inform your thinking as you make this transition. With that, I'd like to hand over to Jonathan at EVBOX, who will take you through the next slide. I'll be driving, so you will hear Jonathan give me a bit of a nudge every now and again to change the slide for him. Jonathan?
Thank you very much. So hello to everybody and good morning. So we're just going to show a little taster here because this is, as you can probably imagine, quite a complex topic. So we're showing three different DC applications here. And obviously, as Dee just mentioned, knowing what the truck's capacity to charge is really critical. So let's just assume that we know that already. And here we have three. So the first one, Tronic Modular. This is a product that goes from 90 to 240 kilowatt DC. It's a standalone unit. So this unit can go, let's say, in a parking space where you're parking trucks, and you can charge 2 trucks at the same time. And it has a very nice large user screen, so it's really easy to be able to use it. The main thing here is that this unit can be dropped in fairly easily. It would obviously need to have the right connection capacity, but it's a very simple install and fix. The second unit is called Ultronic. This is a 175 kilowatt, so this unit starts at a higher level and actually runs up to 350. The reason that there's 2 units here is you have on the left-hand side a user unit. So this is the cable end, which obviously connects to the vehicle. On the right-hand side there, you have a power unit, and that can sit up to 30 meters away. And I'll explain a little bit more about that later. The third unit is a bit of a compromise of both the first 2, but allows you to go up to 350 kilowatts. So this is much bigger. It can be used in a public area, and it has a built-in cooler unit. So once you get over 200 amps, you need to cool the cable down because it gets very hot when it charges. Can I have the next slide, please? So we've got 3 different applications here. One is when you're loading and unloading a vehicle, there's an opportunity to charge there. You perhaps top up charge. So you have a dwell time of between 20 and 60 minutes, and perhaps you want to get around 200 kilowatts into the vehicle. So this is one option, one way of charging. Second one could be you have a daytime or nighttime parking scenario where you have a dedicated space for charging and you have much longer time. So you may use a much smaller charger, so 22 kilowatt typically, or something like that, or 50 kilowatt. So you've got much longer to charge. You don't need to consume so much power so quickly, and you can charge at night, which is much cheaper, of course, very important point. The third one is where you're charging quickly. So in other words, I need to charge in an hour. I need to get as much kilowatt into my battery as possible because I need to get through my routine for the day. And therefore you have a dedicated space for quick charging. Can I have the next slide? So we don't just limit it obviously to loading bay type scenarios, but we've chosen this for the purpose of exercise. So what we're showing here is 3 applications where you've got loading bays and you've got the positions of the user units, that's the cable end, if you remember, of the charger behind the trucks. So in other words, you've got the power unit to one side and then, or behind, and then you've got the units charging at the back or the front of the truck, depending on which way they come in. So in this case, we're very short of space. So you can see there on the bottom picture where the yellow bollards are, there's really hardly any room. And the advantage of this product is it has a ½ meter square footprint. It's very small. And the power unit itself is quite a bit away. So this is quite an important feature. We can also, we have cables up to 15 meters long. So those cables can obviously reach to the cab. Next slide, please. So here we have an example where we had a real problem. This particular customer had the trucks where the connection cable was at the cab at the far end, and they needed to be able to get the cable to that end. And obviously this is quite a long piece of kit to drag across the floor. Not good idea to be dragging cables across the floor, as you probably imagine. So we have a device here, which is a tower. You can see the silver tower there. And that had an electric retraction cable. So it allows you to distribute the cable without dragging it on the floor to the front of the cab, plug in, carry out the routine, and then disconnect, and then it automatically reels back in. So this was a very nice solution to a problem. The point we're making here is that there are lots and lots of different scenarios. Sometimes the building, I'm afraid, doesn't help you a lot. So you need to design a system which allows the routine to go forward. So don't be afraid of those things. Dee, I'm sure, more than happy to help you on that. So thank you very much, George. Back to you.
Thank you. Didn't realize there were quite so many options already available. This is going to be a lively and interesting discussion, I think, when people realize what can be done. It's, yeah, looking forward to this. So up next, we've got Henry Johnson, who's Daimler's Head of Charging Infrastructure. Henry, over to you, if you're there.
Thanks, George, and good morning, everyone. So yes, my name is Henry Johnson. I work at Daimler here in Stuttgart in Germany, and I'm working on the topic of charging infrastructure. So firstly, thanks a lot for the introduction to the topic from Engie and EVBOX. As said, I'm part of my responsibility is to look at the kind of partners we work with, hardware, software and installation on that side of things, as well as the utility partners. So Dee obviously already mentioned those kind of connections we have to make with the grid, and making sure that they're on the same page as us is certainly vital. Anyway, we've discussed a little bit about what happens in the depot. So I thought I'd take it a step further and show a few slides about what would happen in the public sphere, what happens on the road, on the motorways and whatnot. And if you've got a passenger car, I'm sure you've had your own challenges charging up on the motorway, and we expect similar challenges for trucks. Things like, how do you get your payment done? Is there enough parking spaces? Potentially like, does the charger work at all in the first place? Am I going to drive up and the charger is not going to work? So these are the types of challenges that have faced the passenger car side of things, and now we need to look at it from the truck side of things as well. And I thought I'd start with a slightly amusing photo. This is our new eActros that many of you may have heard of, announced at the beginning of this month. And we've tried to do a little bit of public charging to see how things work. And as you can see from the photo here, I think it's fair to say that, yeah, this is not great. And we need to think about how best to park trucks. So as you can see here, we're going to take about 3 or 4 parking spaces in place of passenger cars. Okay, I think it was mentioned quickly before, but let's have a look at it again. Also at Daimler Trucks, we envisage 3 main parking scenarios. Those are the depot charging, opportunity charging, and public hub charging, as we call it. I think those are basically determined by essentially 2 factors. One is where they are. Are they on pieces of private land within depots, or are they on public land, such as on motorways? And also that charging time, or I think, yeah, Engie is referring to that as dwell time. So we've got the larger, or should we say the longer charging times overnight, where the vehicle is stationary. I put 6 to 12 hours, depending on the use case, of course. We've got the opportunity charging in the middle there, a little bit shorter time, 30 to 90 minutes. So you could envisage that as if you're hauling for a supermarket, you might have a 30-minute drop-off point at the supermarket. You might be doing drayage at a port where you have to put the wears and tears on the back. It might take a little bit longer. Another one that we've come across is also auto parts. While we're building the trucks, of course, we want to make the delivery channels as sustainable as possible. And for our delivery trucks that come to our plants to build our vehicles, we also want to do a little bit of opportunity charging there. That said, the main focus for me today was the public hub charging, and that's what we can see on the right. So 15 to 45 minutes. Generally, we talk mainly about the 45 minutes. Why is that? I'm sure many of you know that European regulations say that for every 4.5, or should we say 4.5 hours of drive time, drivers need a 45-minute break. So that's what we're calculating there as a usual time for charging at public hubs. So let's have a little look now at the challenges and requirements of such a public hub and how we can get that right for our customers. So at the top left here, we're having a little look at the challenges. As said, I think for the next couple of years, let's say 2, 3, maybe 4 years, we're going to be looking at essentially 100% charging in the depot. So that's kind of local, maybe regional delivery. But certainly as soon as we get to long haul charging, we want to be ready to have a bit more energy taken in public charging sites. So you see that here, 20 to 30% we approximate of the energy that your battery trucks will be taking will happen at public charging sites. And of course, it's a little bit hard to predict there for everyone. TCO is relevant. If you charge at your depot, of course, you'll be well aware of the prices that you'll be paying, but it might be a little bit more, should we say, of a surprise if you go to certain public charging sites. And obviously, therefore, one thing we need to make sure of is that we have transparency and clarity about the pricing at public sites. The second one there, and we've already had a look at it on the first slide, was the fact that there are no real public charging hubs at the moment for e-trucks. So what does that mean? Everyone firstly thinks about the amount of power that you need, so sort of fast or rapid chargers, I believe they're called in the UK, generally will not do the job that we need, and therefore we need to think about higher outputs of power. However, secondly, and the point that most people don't think of in the first seconds, is the fact that we've got a much larger vehicle. It's not 2 meters by 4 meters. It might be 3 meters by up to 20 meters, depending on what kind of setup you have. And last but not least, when we have a new type of fuel, whether it be a more efficient petrol or diesel, whether it be new CNG or LNG products, maybe even hydrogen in the future, we generally knew who the players were who were going to be helping support us with the rollout of that. For electricity, I think we've got a new set of players on the market. Companies like electricity providers, those who determine the prices. We've got the DSOs, or I think in the UK they're called DNOs, so distribution network operators, who basically determine where power is distributed to. And of course, there may be other players such as landowners and big oil might also play a part in this. So we've got quite a bit of dependency on those players and how willing and reliant we are on them to set up charging stations in key locations. Onto the right side, having a little look at the requirements, and I hope you can forgive me for talking a little bit about the European level. Unfortunately, I don't have specific UK data, but certainly on the European level, we've got the ACEA organization. That's an organization for all the automobile manufacturers. And at the top right, as you see, they've come up with an approximation of the number of charging points that we need in Europe. So 2025, looking at about 18,000. Daytime 14,000, nighttime 4,000. I'll come on to that a little bit later, what that daytime and nighttime actually means. And then the big jump towards 2030, where we're looking at 85,000 charging points needed across Europe. One thing I should say, many of you have probably heard that there's a joint venture that has been announced recently between ourselves, Daimler Trucks, Traton and Volvo. And that's, of course, with the aim of taking a bite, taking a chunk out of these charging points. We hope to set the standard and really push that direction, push that strategy forward there. So that's the number of charging points and where we're going to find them, primarily on the motorways. There will, of course, be examples of non-motorway routes. Of course, in the UK, certain A roads have quite, should we say, important stature. So we're going to have to set up chargers there as well. But those are our two focal points, certainly until 2030. As far as the distance is concerned between the hubs, we approximated about 50 miles. Well, it depends if you want to work in kilometers, we say between 50 and 100 kilometers, but I think 50 miles, people get a good idea of how far that is between hubs. And of course, the vehicles will be able to drive a lot longer than 50 miles. So we're probably thinking about 250, 300 miles of range generally. And the last one there is logistic company clusters. So essentially, we find that a lot of hauliers situate their bases or their depots at similar locations, at key sites, and there could be potential to have public charging sites very close to those. So hauliers can essentially share that kind of communal charging hub. Next is the setup. As mentioned a moment ago, we've got power concerns that we need to think about. But more importantly, actually, we've got the layout. So as you know, probably from passenger cars, they drive up nose front to the charger and then they charge. But we're thinking about different setups for trucks, potentially having islands on both sides, and it's sort of a drive-through concept. Also taking into account space requirements, whether you're a regular rigid whether you are a truck trailer or whether you've got a rigid with a trailer on the end. Setup 6 to 36 months grid connection. I don't want to shock anyone on the line, but essentially this is the kind of requirement we have when we speak to the DNOs when requiring getting power and suitable power to a site. I should say that with a proviso, as said, this is a kind of a European analysis, and 36 months is generally what we see in some of the states in Eastern Europe. For the UK, I think we're looking at between 6 and 18 months, depending on the location. If you're, of course, relatively near somewhere central, like central London, or maybe around the M25, it's going to be a little bit less. If you're out in the countryside, it might be a little bit more. So that is, as said, why we need to talk with those providers and those DNOs, those grid operators, as quickly as possible to get them on the page. Last but not least, power outage, or power output, should I say. We know that passenger car chargers go up to 350, but most passenger cars do not take that. That will certainly not be the case for trucks. 350 kilowatts potentially will be too low for those 45 minutes that we're talking about in the break. And therefore, we are also talking about 750 kilowatts on the right there. MCS, I'll say a few words about that on the next slide. But then again, we've also got overnight, right? So we know that people take breaks on the motorway at lunchtime, 45 minutes, but certainly at overnight, there are still a lot of vehicles on the road who would like essentially to have what we call trickle charging, slower rates of charging where they can stop at 8 o'clock in the evening and be ready to go with a full battery at 6 o'clock in the morning. So overnight charging is also a discussion point as well. Okay. Last page, last slide, as said, the MCS. I think this is critical, a critical topic of discussion. I know many people are concerned that it takes quite a long time to recharge the vehicles, and therefore, together with our team in the States, we are developing a global charging standard. This is something completely new. We're calling it the Megawatt charging standard, and that's with various industry players and standard organizations, specifically CharIN. And rather than giving lots of verbiage, I essentially wanted to show the kind of ranges we can expect when charging for that 45-minute break during the day. So currently with the CCS, our vehicle that we've just started marketing, the eActros, that will gain around 60 miles in that 45-minute break if you're using the CCS connector. With our future vehicle, the eActros long haul, which we've also kind of teased already, which will be coming at the end of 2024, beginning of 2025, we're looking at 125 miles. But probably most of you are shaking your heads saying that certainly won't be sufficient. And therefore, if we look one row down, we've got the MCS charger, and 275 miles of extra range is certainly manageable during that 45 minutes break at lunchtime. As said, I'm hoping that we've got lots of exciting questions. I wanted to keep that presentation relatively generic. I know we're coming from all different backgrounds, so I'm certainly looking forward to receiving some of your questions. So thanks for listening, and let's move on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Henry, and thank you to Wolfgang, Dee, and Jonathan as well. So up next, we're moving on to the discussion portion of this event. So I'd like to invite our guests to turn on their cameras. Hopefully we'll see them in just a moment. And I'm going to introduce you to the expert operator panel for the next part of this eMobility discussion. Don't forget, you can begin to ask your own questions on the questions tab. We'll try to get through as many of those as we can later on. So joining us now to discuss their experiences and thoughts are Tony Stewart, Head of Logistics Operations Support at Hovis, and Graham Thomas, Fleet Operations Manager at Ocado. So a select pair of very knowledgeable and interesting operators. I'm sorry, I'm falling over myself there. I'm so excited, can't wait. Good morning, guys. I'd like to start with a quick introduction from each of you on what your experiences have been so far in operating electric vehicles before we start talking about the infrastructure itself. So Tony, if you're there, would you like to start? I understand you're already operating a couple of eCanters.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Couple of eCanters, and to be fair, they've been very, very reliable. Probably the most reliable trucks we've had for the past 2 years. However, I need to put that into some context. they only do about 60, 65 miles a day. So if you think about it, 2 years use at 65 miles a day, if I have to buy a new DAF 15-ton, Merc 15-ton, and only operate them 60 miles a day, in 10 years, they'd have only done 150,000 miles. There'll still be a new truck. You know, we do that in 2 years. So it's very difficult for me to actually put a real comparison. Yes, the trucks are quite complex, being electric, but they haven't given me any real issues. But to be honest, I would have been really disappointed had they give us any issues. The biggest issues we've had is with the charging units. They're the things that seem to let us down most over the last two to 3 years. So, and obviously, no, we went for a first generation charging unit. Things may have evolved now, but the trucks themselves operate fantastic. Drivers love driving them. By and large, we don't have any problems charging them. If they've done 250 miles a day, honestly, we'd be in a different place. But only being 60, they have limited use. So therefore, we're limited to what we can do with them. But as a concept, I'm happy to continue to use them. We've got two replacements coming. And I'm looking forward to a different level of electric truck, viable electric truck, being available in the near future before we can decide what that looks like for us as a business.
And Tony, may I ask here, and thank you for your remark, does it mean that most likely right now you are contingent on your own charging station in your site? You don't need any kind of public infrastructure for this?
No, because of the distance they go, it can comfortably get there and back.
Yeah, I see.
And we have to, we plot, you know, from a depot out deliveries back again.
Okay, but that may change once you try to go to 250, 300 miles with. Yeah.
That would depend again on the load capacity of the truck itself, because the truck is pretty small in load capacity, and give it 2, 3, 4 times the distance. So it's quite a challenge there on a relatively small truck. And the challenges maybe overcome better on a slightly bigger truck.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Tony. Really interesting. And I expect you'll have some good questions for Dee and Jonathan later on about where those new chargers are going to take you and what you can be doing when you've got a bigger fleet and a fleet with a bigger range to deal with. If we could just pass over to Graham now. Graham, good morning.
Morning.
Hopefully you're there. I understand you've gone down the CNG route a bit with your current fleet.
Yeah, absolutely. Our truck fleet is, we're heavily invested in CNG for running that distance from, say, Hatfield to Leeds and Sheffield, also out of Tamworth. So yeah, CNG is where we've opted, and we've been running that route now for almost 3 years with the heavy fleet. In terms of electrification, we've been doing that on the 3.5 ton van range, albeit at 4.25 ton, using the Category B license derogation to drive those on a Category B license. So electrification is probably a way off for us. In terms of truck, we'd certainly be waiting for the eActros LH really. As a tractor unit, our truck fleet is only tractor unit, so it's much easier to electrify 18 and 26 ton as a rigid than it would be to do a tractor at this stage. The challenge is, I guess, you're looking at the electrification piece. You know, we've got 3.5 or 4.25 ton vans that on paper have got 95 miles of range, running out of Park Royal, and there are still some of those that have done 12 miles, and we're bringing them back on a low loader because they've run out of charge. Now, that's lots of reasons for that. Some of that is some charging issues in terms of driver education and making sure we've got the connectivity right and working that piece. Some of it's around, and I think it was Dee's presentation talked about it at the beginning, about driver behaviour. You know, if you drive it like you stole it, you'll run out of battery quite quickly. And then the other thing is we're powering the fridge from that traction battery as well. So we've still got food to keep cold. 95 miles should be perfectly adequate, but we still occasionally have those challenges. But we're 2 years in with those and moving nicely. But with the heavy stuff, we've been looking at the CNG. I picked up, Henry, you talked about the public charging, and you talked about where you put those and some of the pieces around that. And if I look at the CNG station at Daventry at Durft, where there might be 300 fuelings a day. It'd be interesting to see what a public charging hub might look like there for that group of operators that operate in that region. A public hub that would take 300 trucks charging a day would be fairly significant, I would suggest.
Yeah, it certainly won't be an easy thing to orchestrate. Perhaps Dee and Jonathan have some ideas about how that public access space requirement. I think we've mentioned about the space needed for these setups, but also there's the cost involved. There's probably some insight you can give us on that again. Is there, Dee and Jonathan?
Yeah, I mean, the way that we've operated our public network to date, and it is only for sort of domestic and light vehicles at this stage, but I think a lot of the challenges are similar. But although they're similar, they're probably magnified once you start dealing with goods transport, aren't they? So we've not purchased any land to put our chargers on. What we've done is gone out and rented it. And we've got the luxury, with it being 1 or 2 chargers here and there, of renting corners of Morrison's car parks. But even that, I'll be honest, has been a bit of a logistical nightmare in terms of figuring out way leaves and groundworks and civils. So we are going to have to, I think, come together collectively to figure out how we find this land. So from a logistics operator point of view, where do you need them to be? Because I kind of have to go and fight the fight for the funding. So I have to go to Engie and say, can I have a load of capex, please? I want to build a charging station. And I think loads of people will turn up. And if I get that money, I go and spend it with EVBOX and they give me the chargers and away we go. But the bit that is always a gamble with this sort of infrastructure is the utilisation. So to take the domestic example again, it can cost us about £35,000 to put a charger in the ground. We then charge 35 pence a kilowatt hour to get the money out of it. So you can imagine how long it takes us to get a return on our investment. If I then go back and say, well, actually, rather than a small charger, 1 in a car park, I would like to install 300 larger chargers here, I need some pretty solid evidence that it's the right thing to do. Now, me as a lone voice going back to Engie and saying, I think this is a good idea, doesn't work. I think these kinds of discussions are exactly what's needed, because we're going to need to be coming back. The example you've just given, Graham, about, Daventry, great. Tell us those locations. Let's work as a group to say, well, that would be a great idea. Where do we need the space? What can we do collectively? And then we're going to have to go and see what we can do about funding to get the infrastructure in. Because I think we've got all the gear. We need the location and the money, I think, is the crux of the matter. But it's going to take all of us working together.
George,
Graham and Tony. Sorry, carry on, Tony.
On Dee's point, I think we're a bit reverse chicken and egg scenario here at the moment. We're talking about having an infrastructure, but it's really difficult to build an infrastructure when you don't know what you're building it for. We don't know what trucks are going to be available tomorrow, 5 years' time, 10 years' time, what their abilities are going to be. So we're talking, it's great. We need to be talking about an infrastructure, but I think we've got to be careful we don't get too ahead of ourselves. Until we know what trucks are going to be available and how long their lifespan is going to be for, we could be investing billions of pounds in an infrastructure that doesn't fit, and we could run out of time for these infrastructures. We might go to a different fuel source in 15 years' time. So I think we have to be absolutely, we can't guess the future, but we have a lot of experts that can tell us where we think we're going to be. But it's all great talking about what sort of chargers, hyperchargers, superchargers, whatever. But without knowing about what the trucks are going to be available to us, can I plan how to distribute our goods, what effect that has on the drivers? We also have to say there's little things like things that might get lost in this. If your driver plugs his vehicle in and then goes and has a cup of tea, is that classed as okay from working time directive, or does he have to stay with his vehicle? If he has to stay with his vehicle, that's not rest. The whole point of rest is the driver's not required at his workstation. So if he pulls into a service station, goes and have a cup of coffee with a diesel truck, he's obviously having rest. But if he has to plug it in and has to stay with it for all sorts of reasons, that might not be classed as rest time. So these are things we need to understand and build into our infrastructure as well. So it really does come back to the truck manufacturers. What do they see as offering us to get us from a point in time to whenever we need to, where we need to be in 2035 or 2040?
Tony, I really appreciate these discussions and your remarks on this one, because the idea of today's roundtable and discussion is all about listening in, about the expectations from you as our customers, and where we are right now in our considerations of how we can, let's say, find the best mix. Because infrastructure is not just because on us as a manufacturer to my, but we are here now to listen, and please shoot us in more remarks, more questions. I think the infrastructure is something which is going to start right now. And it is a combination out of what a manufacturer as Daimler, Mercedes-Benz Trucks, what we can do for you in collaboration with our partners, which we are going to introduce today, yeah, and also in collaboration with the wider joint venture, which we signed between Traton, Daimler, and Volvo, so on an even wider scope, and the public infrastructure, yeah? Because the public infrastructure, I assume, and at some point in time, also this discussion would come up in local councils, yeah? So, meaning that they may have also an interest in finding some space for the trucks, yeah? Maybe not right in the city, but a little bit more outside, giving them some room, yeah? We will also see that, from my perspective, the big petrol companies like BP, they will adjust. So it is an infrastructure journey which we are going to start now, and our idea is that while collaborating, while hooking up, while going into partnership with companies like Engie, yeah, we think we would like to do an extra mile for our customers, yeah, so that we have already in the very beginning a little bit more to offer than just the truck, yeah. So therefore, I would really appreciate. Therefore, thank you very much, Tony, for your statement, and just very curious about, interesting about what else do the others listening in, yeah, what they think, what is their expectation also on us, what have they figured so far, yeah, what are their experiences? So just share a little bit more with us.
I think that, I mean, there's a piece that government need to step up here as well, because whilst if you think and you know, CNG and LNG, gas has been around as a transport fuel from different manufacturers in different forms for at least the last 10 years. Yet it's never really got a foothold because the infrastructure has not been there to support it. And potentially that's a good side, easier to do than electrification. And it's only really in the last 2 to 3 years that you've started to see a ramp up in terms of gas filling stations available as public access. And that's because you've got a couple of 2 or 3 different decent models out there now offering sensible range. And that's you're getting that sign up, and that's what's starting to push that infrastructure development. It's the chicken and egg piece, and as long as it's only ever relying on the private sector funding it, it's going to stay laboriously slow. You know, the simple fact of the matter is, it costs a significant amount of money to go and whack a new substation in somewhere. And you talk about the way leaves and all the work with the DNO and everything else to get that done. I had to do that for a gas station in Hatfield for a back-to-base operation, and it took forever and cost a significant amount of money. And even just for a small substation to power the compressors we need for the CNG, that's still a big lump of money for an asset that you don't own, because we'll never own that substation, and I've still got to pay for the electric that comes out of it.
Yeah.
So, you know, government needs to put some cash behind this as well. But they're significant lumps of cash.
May I ask a question, which may be also of the interest of those customers and business partners listening in right now to Engie and EV? Do you have any projection on your end? Let's say how many stations you may be able, let's say, to run or to operate, let's say, in 5 years from now. Do you have any projection for yourself, where you would like to see yourself be in 3 to 5 years from now?
For the domestic market, for me, yes. Yeah, for the domestic market in the UK, so light vehicles and you know, cars, yes, we know we're looking at sort of 1,500 charge points in 5 years. For bus and truck, we're not there. You know, part of the reason I was really looking forward to attending today is to get a chance to talk to you guys and hear, you know, what are your plans? Where are you going? Because I think, George, you hit the nail on the head when you said it all feels a bit chicken and egg at the moment. You know, when will we have the trucks? Okay, but when will we have the infrastructure? Okay, but when will you put it in the ground? And actually, these conversations are really important to start to move that forward. I think our focus is going to be predominantly, and Jonathan, Ben will jump in, on depot charging for the time being, with a conversation about public infrastructure coming later. However, I would be prepared to revise that position. Say we had another one of these in 3 months' time, and the overwhelming response from logistics partners here was, actually, we would go more towards electric if we had a few charging hubs here and there. Absolutely, we would change tactic in response to that. But right now, I think we're looking predominantly at depot from an Engie perspective.
Henry, may I ask a question to you from, let's say, from the wider, let's say, broader Daimler Truck perspective? How is your, let's say, right now prognosis about the big joint venture which we signed? Yeah, you mentioned that between Traton and Volvo.
Yeah.
Will that be also beneficial for us here in UK, so that we have even a wider offer for our customers going forward? Can you make, maybe too early to talk about that today, but what can you share today for us?
Certainly, I think one of the key messages is that, as I said, we've got this long haul vehicle coming at the end of 2024. And to give our customers confidence that there will be infrastructure by then to so that you can actually run those longer routes, we've got to start as soon as possible with those charging stations. The UK, of course, not only for Mercedes-Benz, but also for the others, Volvo and Tronic, is an extremely important market. So I think it's fair to say that chargers will come sooner rather than later. There is a point, of course, where it requires customers to put up their hands and say, we have these routes. We're going from X to Y. We're using the M25. We're using the M1, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a conversation that thereby we understand which are the routes that are important for you. And then we would essentially go about speaking with the DNOs to make sure that those routes are fully covered by 2025, such that customers have confidence that they will be able to run those routes.
Do you, Mayor, and another question which I would like to add, do you see any chances of, let's say, getting into even also closer contact while we proceed, yeah, on our way forward with the governments, with the authorities, or do you think that will be finally a kind of, wouldn't say kind of, let's say, parallel path? And on one hand side, as a customer, you may have to decide, I like to rely more on the private business while getting my vehicle charged, or I can also, let's say, make a kind of hybrid between public charging, meaning governmental stations, and more organized and run by a private business? Or is it too early to make an adjustment at that point?
No, I mean, too early maybe to actually go talk to the government tomorrow, but certainly, yes, we need to do that. What can I say? I mean, we've already heard the problem, number one, that the amount of time it takes to set up some of these substations is there. We need to make sure that there are no barriers on the DNO side of things so that we have some kind of priority. Second is the financial, I suppose. Of course, private companies will be there, not only this joint venture. I imagine that there will be, oil majors, BP, Shell, amongst others, who will also show an interest. But I'm also hoping that there will be energy companies, for example, Engie and others, who will also show an interest. At the end of the day, it's their commodity which is being sold. However, that being all said, I think there's certainly a requirement that we start talking to the governments in each of the countries that we want to roll out our vehicles in. At the end of the day, they're the ones who essentially can speed up or slow down processes depending on what is, shall we say, taken to be a national strategy. So I think the quicker we start on that, the better. Yeah, and the more conversations we have, the better as well.
Do you think we're all not getting? Do you think we're all getting ahead of ourselves here a bit? So talking about governments and private companies, like in the energy sector, building these charging infrastructures, when really the onus is probably at the moment on the operators. So Tony, I'm sure, had to install his own charging network to operate those e-canters. It would seem that, in order, because there are electric products now on the market, so it would seem that the onus is very much on the operator to fend for themselves, because it is going to take, as we've said, up to maybe 36 months just to get the connection piped in for some of these bigger areas.
I think right now that's right, George. I think, right now that's where our focus is this depot private network electrification piece. But Henry's absolutely right. If we don't start the public charging conversation now, given the lead times to install something like a public hub, you're never going to have them online by the time the trucks are available. Sorry, Ross.
I think if I just may add something to that, I'll introduce myself first of all. Ross Patterson, I'm head of special trucks at Mercedes-Benz in Milton Keynes, also responsible for the onboarding of our e-trucks. That comment about customers may well find themselves standing on their own, sorting out their own infrastructure. I would certainly disagree with that. We have just recruited an e-consultant who will be working directly within my team. Their job will be to sit down with customers when they have that very, very first thought of running heavy electric trucks. How is that going to work for them? What is the infrastructure that's going to be required to meet their operational needs? And follow that through from absolute cradle to grave, from the delivery of the truck itself, as well as working closely with our infrastructure and charging partners to make sure that the customer is on a very, very comfortable journey. And that we're absolutely certain that the products that we are proposing to the customer are completely fit for their purpose. So yeah, please don't think for a second that you're going to be standing there alone as a customer on this journey, because we are determined at Mercedes-Benz Trucks that we will join you and make sure that that works completely holistically from start to finish.
I think that's a good point, Ross, but the reality is I think the onus of the cost is going to be back on the operator. So if
I would agree with that, yeah.
12-ton truck that could do 150 miles and I needed 250 miles, I'd have to find something to charge it after 140 miles somewhere in my journey. And that will probably come down to me at this stage to invest in that. And that's a big limiting factor moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%, Tony.
You need a collaboration to get that charging point where it needs to be. And the difficulty we've got as an industry, it's never going to be in the right place. Whatever. And that's something we're going to have to overcome.
Graham and Tony, are you thinking that your way forward then is to just build your own network? Is that the way you see this working?
And for the moment, if someone said I've got a 12-ton delivery truck that can do 150 miles, I needed to do 250 as an average, I would then see how I could use that vehicle in a limited network, because it couldn't go everywhere. It'd have to be on specific routes, specific journeys. So it takes away a lot of flexibility. But I'd have to build in a charging network for that one particular vehicle or that one particular route. So that means I invest in the depot that's operating out of, and somewhere on that journey, how do we build in a charging mechanism today to operate that vehicle? And we can do that, but it's very complex and it'll probably be very expensive. And then it makes it a limiting factor to go to that next step for a specific vehicle type basis.
I think that's, Tony, I think that's pretty good, because if you look at the way that current charging works, 80% of it's done at home. So I know this is not a like for like, because you're talking about lorries rather than cars, but I think there's something to learn there. Most people will charge at their depot and then charge, as you say, en route. The choice of where the charger is critical, clearly. But I just want to talk about range just briefly, because if I think 3 years ago, the Nissan Leaf only had a 20 kilowatt battery in it, and everybody was terrified about driving down the road and running out of power in about 80 miles. But if you look at vehicles now, that conversation has changed, because a lot of vehicles now do between 250 and 300 miles. So the range anxiety, certainly on, let's say, cities and regional, has gone. Into city, not gone. And this is why Tesla has a march on everybody else, because they've got an infrastructure network already set up. But I see the debate changing. I think with trucks, we're still very early. Everybody acknowledges that. We're not there. The manufacturers are clearly working on some great kit. And the battery part of it is a very important element of it. I don't know whether there's going to be a mixture of batteries and other technology like hydrogen. I don't know whether it's a mix. It's something that it's got to be figured out, particularly for the really big trucks. But for sure, I think we still have a little way to go in order to get to the place where everybody is comfortable, and particularly big users like you guys can get value out of it, rather than it's a box tick that we've got electric vehicles, for example.
Yeah, this isn't an easy challenge. If it was easy, we'd have done it by now, practically every street corner. So, we've now got to put in a gas infrastructure or an electric infrastructure Jonathan, you just mentioned hydrogen, a hydrogen infrastructure for fuel cells, for range extension. This is all, you know, lots and lots of investment. This is lots of thought, lots of collaboration that's got to go on. There are a huge number of operators, mainly own account operators, that will absolutely say, well, yeah, we want back to base charging because that makes sense for us. We're in control of the cost. Ultimately, we've all got FDs that we've got to prove a TCO to. And if I've got to pay a variable amount per kilowatt hour to charge a hub somewhere, then that takes the TCO outside of my control. So therefore, that makes me a little bit more cautious when I'm selling it to the FD, who's then going to say yay or nay to doing it. And not only am I going to say, by the way, Mr. FD, I need to buy this eye-wateringly expensive electric truck, but I've also got to install this eye-wateringly expensive substation. And actually, if we need to charge at somewhere in Daventry on the way up to Manchester, it's going to cost us 70p a kilowatt hour instead of 35p a kilowatt hour. They're not easy conversations to be having. But so you know, it's got to be a whole cast iron piece of work.
I think it comes back to that government conversation again, and I think my experience is very kind of domestic related at the moment. However, the government have really started to switch on to the conversations with charge point operators now. So we're probably speaking to them fortnightly now about pricing, about availability, about barriers to roll out. And they are starting to hear when we talk about things like DNO connection speeds, DNO connection costs. You know, the fact that those challenges exist within the car market and kind of making that transition a little bit earlier with smaller domestic use vehicles. Hopefully, the government's engagement is a really good sign, because it means as we come to tackle this problem for logistics, they've got some experience and they're keen. And B, I think they're making some of their early mistakes and cutting their teeth on the bit where it isn't quite as critical. So hopefully when we kind of learn from that in terms of the government conversation, we can then scale that up for a slightly more critical conversation about logistics infrastructure. But you're absolutely right. In terms of the rollout, we're going to need a nationwide conversation.
And there's going to have to be a massive change of hearts and minds for everyone in the industry and the rest of the country. Like you say, where do we park these vehicles to charge them? Great big 40-footers on the side of the road. You know, there's going to be a massive, the whole country has to relook at itself, as does Europe. Because as we know, in 2040, we'll be in a completely different place. The world will be completely different. But getting people's hearts and minds to buy into that, we'll buy into it as an industry, because we do. That's what we're good at. We're good at reacting, we're good at change, we're good at absorbing, but getting the rest of effectively, the hearts and minds of the nation to go with us, that's going to be the biggest challenge. Because they're going to find vehicles parked on the sides of the road where they don't want to see them, technically. And that's where you need government and local council help as well.
But Ross, and I think, Tony, thank you, and also Dee, and may take a little bit of time, and this is also why we as a manufacturer see an important responsibility with us and the partners which we found so far, in order to find the best transition. I don't know, Ross, whether you may like to add a few words more about how we really understand our responsibility. You mentioned already that there will be, you mentioned holistic approach. Maybe feel free to add a few words more if you like, Ross.
Yeah, I mean, you know, a lot of it starts long before face-to-face conversations. As an example, you know, people wonder, I need to do X amount of kilometers a day. Is that truck going to be appropriate for it? So as an example, we've launched what we call an e-truck ready app. And essentially you do this regular journey in a normal diesel truck. You have this app on the driver's phone, and that would then calculate and report back to you whether or not an eActros or an eAconic or even an eCanter would be appropriate for that journey. And if it's not, how far around that journey will it get before it needs a charge? So a lot of these things to kind of settle people's minds and give them the confidence from the outset, whether or not it will need some remote charging away from your base or whether it won't, and it will make it back comfortably. But of course, you know, it is a very significant challenge, and I don't underestimate it at all. I think, you know, charging in your own depot is one thing, but this whole piece around charging remotely is a completely different piece. And Tony and Graham completely understand and respect your opinion on that. From a roadmap point of view, we've gone public a couple of weeks ago with regard to the eActros and eAconic rigid vehicles, both 2-axle and 3-axle for the eActros and 3-axle for the eAconic. And a lot of the technical details have now been released on those, and we can have more comfortable and confident conversations with customers around it. And it's a journey that we're on together, definitely, from battery electric vehicles through to hydrogen fuel cell, long distance tractor units towards the end of the decade. There's a lot of ground to be covered between now and then, for sure. And as I say, we don't underestimate it, but we are making sure that we've got the experts in place to be able to answer as many questions as we possibly can, and as many concerns that you as operators raise, whether that's us directly or with our charging partners, to make sure that we literally are holding your hand on the journey as we would like to see it.
In the short term, sorry, Tony, go ahead.
I don't know if this will ever be possible, but it'd be a great help to us as operators. All the major manufacturers were on that same trajectory, and all had the same idea of what technologies they're going to be in at what stage. Because we don't want to head down one sort of technology with 1 or 2 manufacturers, and another 2 have gone off on a totally different fueling system, whether it be hydrogen cells or whatever. It'd be great if the manufacturers could recognise there needs to be some unity here, so that whatever we do is all on the same path, and then we haven't got to decide in 20 years' time whether we are only a Mercedes-Benz user or a DAF user or a Scania user, because our infrastructure on that journey has basically kept us there and doesn't allow you then to come off that plane. Whether that's possible, it's just a challenge to the manufacturers to try and stay on the same plane as we go down the road.
Yeah, that's very good point that you raised. Certainly, what is in the public domain already is that there is a joint venture between Daimler Trucks and Volvo with regard to the hydrogen fuel cell development, as we're working together on that trajectory. And as Henry and I think Wolfgang also said, that there's already a joint venture with ourselves, Daimler Trucks, Traton, and the Volvo Group with regard to infrastructure charging for battery electric vehicles. So there are examples already where there is partnerships being formed to make sure that we're developing the same technology together at the same time. I wouldn't like to sit here and say that will be expanded, but who knows what the future holds. But certainly already there is a lot of collaboration happening to try and allay some of those concerns, exactly as you just raised, Tony.
We're getting a lot of questions through here about pricing for setting up a charging infrastructure. Presumably it's a sort of single operation back to base. Ross, when you're holding your customers' hands on these discussions, are you able to, or do you intend to give them sort of an indicative cost of what truck plus infrastructure plus TCO is for the vehicles?
Yeah, certainly. The whole idea of us working in collaboration with a charging partner is to achieve exactly that. We're responsible for the truck element. The charging partner is responsible for the charging element. But combine the two together, then yes, absolutely, we will combine those together to an overall offer and proposal to the customer. Of course, it's entirely up to the customer whether they choose to accept either the offer on our truck or indeed the offer on the charging solution that would accompany it. Customer's choice completely, but we know that the charging partner's equipment marries up to our truck perfectly and works as it should and as it's intended. But yeah, the whole idea of this collaboration is to achieve exactly, George, as you've just mentioned.
And presumably, Dee, there's a lot of scope for installing chargers on private property, but also having that discussion if you've got a depot with lots of space, which I think we'll see will become the increasing issue, is that there's not going to be enough space for multiple vehicles to be charging, is to then, as you say, rent a space and open it up to public, and perhaps the operator then gets some more return on their investment.
Yeah, I mean, there's always a balance to be struck. So space is always at a premium, and whenever we come out and have a discussion with you, the reason we come to site is to have a look at the way the depot's operating, the way things are moving in and out, what sort of space availability there is, and indeed the impact of the installation itself, because obviously there may be groundworks to be done. So we need to think about very carefully about how that impacts the operation of the depot. So yeah, we can come out, we can have those conversations, see where we're going. And a lot of the time then, if there isn't sufficient space, either the customer could source more space, or, you know, as we move towards, it's that difference between depot and public again. And I think we've all agreed on here that that public charging problem isn't solved yet. So does the customer go out and rent more space to put chargers on, or acquire more space to put chargers on? That's a very big question, and will probably depend on the outcome of the conversations that are happening across sort of between Daimler, Volvo and trading elsewhere in terms of that public charging network piece. So there's lots of moving parts, and I think it comes back to that message of it's never too early to start the conversation. And I think a lot of the time when we create quotations for people, we tend to create a bit of a roadmap. So there might be something you do right now to get, as Tony said, a couple of trucks up and running. And then it might be that within a year or two, you add a couple more. But at each stage, you revisit the conversation to see what's going on with public charging, what's going on with your business. There's a lot of moving pieces to consider before we start thinking about, yeah, just go buy some more land, chuck some chargers on it. But equally, were you to be operating in an area where it's sort of a logistical hub, as was referred to earlier, should you choose to acquire more space and build yourself a charging hub, and you think you've got enough chargers to open them up to other people, you could monetize that. You could have people coming and using your chargers, and you could be charging them for it. You know, there's a lot of interoperability options. I think that's probably a privately owned charging hub, publicly available charging hubs are probably a little way away in terms of the cost of investment right now, but it's certainly not pie in the sky. It's something that's feasible should anybody want to go that route.
Tony and Graham, I don't know how you feel about this, but it does seem like there might be a degree of selfishness that operators will have to take, because I'm sure you'd be very reluctant to offer up some space, knowing that you may well have a vehicle coming back in that might then jeopardize your jobs for the day.
There's a bit of a story there, actually. So yeah, the only reason we are where we are with CNG is because we invested a significant amount of money in our site in Hatfield to build our own CNG refueling station. And that's what allows us to do what we do today in terms of Hatfield. Now, the bottom line with Hatfield as a site for us is it's not a very big site. It's very, very busy. It's very congested. And I haven't got the space for other operators to be out there coming in and refueling via CNG there. I think we've always said we'll support seed vehicles for operators and trial vehicles, that kind of stuff. But actually, there isn't the space to have other people coming in and refueling there. Equally at Hatfield, we're power constrained. We had to put, say, an extra substation in just to power the compressors for the CNG. We also run 280 vans out of that site, 3.5 tonners. You imagine the extra power requirement we've got in there for refueling 70 trucks, 280 vans, plus whatever I end up with doing refrigerated trailers at some point in the future. We're not sure what that's going to look like. So again, the option of others coming in and charging in and plugging in is going to be limited. Equally, in Tamworth, we're current at where I wanted to build my CNG station there actually lent itself perfectly. The reality is that somebody else within the business had designs on that piece of land, and I've had to build it inside the perimeter. So it's much more difficult then for other people to be using it. So it depends on your individual circumstances for the site you've got. I mean, the other challenge is, again, Tony and I are both we're own account operators, largely back to base. General hauliers on that public hub stuff, or charging at a place somewhere they're delivering to, like us or maybe Tony. So they're going to be crying out for that. The other challenge they're going to have, specifically when you get to the long haulers, a lot of them in the UK are running a 44 ton, and will need some weight allowance to be able to do that. And that's why a lot of those guys, they want range and weight allowance. And that's why a lot of those guys have not looked at switching to gas, and they're not going to have the room for batteries. So there are two very different markets in the UK in terms of operators. You've got your own account back to base operators, but you've also got a lot of general hauliers that are running at 44 ton.
I don't know if I dropped off here. Can you hear me?
Can you hear you, Tony? We can't
We
see.
can hear you.
The camera's gone a bit peaked on, but as long as you can hear me. I mean, I recognise we may have to use somebody else's charging points around the country to make a vehicle viable. So I can only honestly say we'd be open to having to do the same. I don't know how we do it at this stage. I don't understand the complexities that will come with it, you know, but I think to answer your question simply, I will have to use other people's, and I wouldn't be against other people using ours where it's possible and practical.
I think just to add to the depot analysis, you know, we at Mercedes-Benz Trucks, we've all got diesel in our veins as much as the rest of you. You know, we come from the same place. And when we're looking at depot analysis and following up on what Dee was saying from Engie's perspective, we were wondering, what does that actually look like? And many of you will be aware that we've got our own facility up near Barnsley, Wentworth Park. Certainly Graham and Tony definitely know about it. We run a lot of trucks out of there, our demonstrator fleet. There's loads of trucks that go in and out of there. We're very conscious that that is a site that we need to electrify. So 6-8 weeks ago, we had a meeting up there with Dee and some of her colleagues for them to start that kind of grassroots analysis of a depot that cannot currently charge any trucks at all, and moving it from there to where we need to be to satisfy the volume. And it was a really, really worthwhile experience because we were able to experience exactly what it is that we're going to be, sort of, let's say, selling to our customers in partnership, to the point where, you know, the quotations are all now in place, and, you know, we just need to make some decisions on it. But really, really worthwhile exercise just to understand exactly what that conversation will look like at a customer level, in an appropriate site such as ours at Wentworth Park up in Barnsley.
That was a really good example, actually, Ross, because we had a really good conversation, didn't we, about, you know, what are your plans now? What about the future? And I think we had several options presented to us to try and run off of site capacity or think about putting a substation in. And it was a really useful conversation to then start to think about, you know, do you do heavy capex up front? Do you hedge your bets a little bit? What can we do to future-proof that installation for you slightly, to keep the cost down now, but give you some flexibility in future? So I think somebody else mentioned individual circumstances. It really is a case of coming to each individual business and starting to talk about your aspirations, your logistics, your current situation, and, you know, just the physical infrastructure you currently have. But the point of this partnership is that between the three entities you're hearing from today, we have the relative expertise to pull together to come to you and say, right, okay, here are your options. And, you know, there might be an upfront heavy cost option right now, or there might be something that helps you hedge your bets and future-proof you for later. But, you know, certainly we bring the right expertise to the table to have those individual discussions.
And I think one point we need to also sort of make sure we maintain as we move along this journey, they have to be absolute solutions. It's not like taking your car out and you can think, well, I've only got 20 miles left, I'll find a charging point somewhere. Oh, that one's busy. Oh, there's another one around the corner, according to my app. When we send our vehicles out, it has to be an absolute solution. We have to know it's going to get to where it needs to go. It's going to be able to plug in. It's going to have to do what it needs to do during that time and then go again. Because as soon as that we lose that absoluteness about it, the whole infrastructure just crashes and burns. And that's one thing that car people don't tend to worry about too much. They can go and sit in the motorway services. It's all full up. They'll have another cup of tea. Okay, they're on their holiday somewhere, but they can sit there. We can't do that with goods, perishable goods, or where there's time. That has to be an absolute solution. And that's the complexities and added complexity within all of this infrastructure.
Agreed. And that is, sorry, go on.
Absolutely.
Unless, of course, the standing point is where you're delivering. So it's maybe then becomes at the other end of the, or
of course,
right for you guys, as you said.
Absolute solution, though, George, doesn't it? That is a part of your absolute solution.
Yeah.
But then there could be 5 of you waiting to charge up. You know, it's going to take a lot of communication, a lot of infrastructure, a lot of collaboration across the logistic spectrum.
Yeah, there needs to be a queuing or booking system, or sort of a solution to that, as you say, Tony, that gives you certainty of delivery. Because again, night and day between cars and trucks. Taking my electric vehicle out, if I queue for a charger, it's an inconvenience. All right, it messes up my day slightly. If you guys are queuing for a charger at a truck stop, then actually it's putting your cargo at risk, it's letting your customers down. The level of criticality is totally different. So I think it's definitely one of those challenges we need to work together on. I think it's that 3 forms of charging again. Depot charging, you've got absolute control over. Opportunity charging, you can collaborate with people to give you as close to certainty as we can. Public charging, I think, is still to be defined, but it sounds like Henry and the team are doing a great job of trying to get us a bit closer to that. But I think that opportunity charging in the middle is probably the greyest area at the moment. If you're delivering just to your own locations, great, you're in full control. If you're not, if you're delivering to partner locations, then that's where you start to get into that kind of interoperability piece.
I've had a comment in the Q&A, somebody saying that static charging in depots and hubs can't be the future of charging. But they're suggesting inductive charging as a way forward, obviously requiring massive investment on a government level. What are people's thoughts on that? I know that some cities, I think perhaps in Wolfgang may know about this, in Germany, the bus network is operating with little inductive charging pads at the bus stops, because they know that the bus is going to pull up and be charged. But how does people see that would work as in a heavy truck environment? Would it? I don't throw it out there.
The government has shelved electrifying the rest of the railway because it's too difficult to do. So yeah, if we're going to electrify our tarmac for inductive charging on I think that's probably a bit of a challenge.
Certainly from my perspective, I think I'm just going to be a little bit more aggressive with this. I'm going to hit it on the head and saying complete waste of time. There's too many challenges, financial topics, maintenance topics, which people unfortunately tend to forget about. Who takes responsibility for that? What happens if it shuts down? Then, of course, you've got to make sure that it works again, which means you've got to, block a whole stretch of road. I don't think truck drivers, lorry drivers are going to be more popular than they are if we're closing down stretches of road, right? So that can either be under the road, or we've recently read in the newspapers that there's an idea that catenary charging above the road, as though it's some sort of a tram or train. Certainly, I am personally very, very much against that. So this conductive charging, as we call it, cable-based charging, is essentially the way that we want to do it.
Yeah, we don't, as a manufacturer, we don't see that as an option at all. There's too many variables, and the efficiency of inductive charging doesn't seem to add up at the moment. Certainly, we're talking about investment of costs here of just kit generally, but the thought of having hundreds of miles of inductive charging without what would be horrendous amounts of maintenance to keep that live, otherwise you'll have multiple cars failing on motorways, is a pretty dreadful thought. But doesn't mean to say that we can't continue to look at it and see whether there's a solution now that would work for certain scenarios. Why not? But I think we don't see that as being the future yet. There are certain studies about lots of things, vehicle to grid. There's potential systems where your car goes and charges itself, or your lorry goes and charges itself. Probably lorry's a bit more difficult, but it goes and parts itself. It has instead of connecting a cable, it has some kind of probe that actually goes in and connects into a building. So there's all kinds of different things, but it's far in the future, this type of thing.
A lot of people suggesting truck stops and motorway service stations as areas for these for charging, but also somebody asking if Daimler is considering putting charging stations at their own premises, so presumably at dealer sites. But could that be a new set of dealer requirements, Wolfgang?
We have I think we are open for all these considerations in principle, yeah. And as Ross said, as now mentioned several times, that this will be, let's say, individual discussions. We have to understand how our customer base, once we start really going into these detailed and needed discussions, as Ross mentioned, as Dee mentioned, once we understand more clearly about the need of hubs, and for sure, a dealer principle, those workshops which we are going to electrify. Yeah, Ross, I think, can we make already this statement that those dealer workshops which will be electrified, meaning which will be ready for high voltage work, will they also have a charging station? Can we make already a statement today, or is it quite too early to make a call here?
Well, to be e-truck ready, they have to have a charger, but it wouldn't necessarily be one that would be appropriate for public charging, to be honest.
Public charging, yeah. So that maybe then a different, but let's say, see what the requirements come up. Once we go into these discussions with our customers, and once we learn better about it, and if we then figure out that would be very much appropriate to also include a dealer, we will have a discussion for sure. But we have not, let's say, at that point in time, have a 100% clear mind on this. Yeah.
And Henry, perhaps a question for you. People are talking about the different charging rates and the amount of power draw from the grid. Is there a golden bullet, an ideal solution that would not future-proof, because no one has a crystal ball, but at least give us a good fighting chance of installing some infrastructure tomorrow that's not going to then be redundant in the years soon thereafter?
I don't believe I can give you an answer today. I don't think I can give you an answer ever, because essentially it relies very, very strongly on the use case. So if you have a truck that only has 4 hours of break time every day, you're really driving it double shift, 2 drivers potentially using that vehicle, then you need something completely different from if you're using a waste disposal vehicle, which sometimes parks itself up to 18 hours, and which therefore you can get much cheaper charging infrastructure for. So I know where the question is coming from, but it's difficult to answer it.
And in terms of for a public infrastructure, then, where there would need to be a magic solution that fits most people, what would be the ideal? Perhaps another question for Dee and for Jonathan there. What is the golden charging standard that we should be aiming for?
Do you want it? Shall I answer it?
I mean, Henry, you can if you like.
Okay.
I was going to say, from our point of view, I'm sort of waiting to see if Jonathan chimed in there. Again, it's situational, it's use case. We tend to operate in a world where we hedge our bets a little bit. We try to, if we're putting in a charging hub, we will put in some really high powered, some lower powered, some AC. They're not bus and truck focused. So in terms of what we put in and where, it will really be informed by the work that Henry is currently doing.
I was trying to get myself off mute. What I would suggest is, from a user perspective, if you're charging through the night or through the day, if you're not using it during the day, then you're charging it at night particularly is going to be low cost. So you can, the point of entry for the charger is much cheaper, as you were saying, Henry, and on top of that, you offer as a good solution all round.
Certainly, I think the price topic is something we haven't really discussed today, and I know this obviously is a UK round, so to speak, but of course we have to remember that we've got a lot of customers coming into the UK and out of the UK, and how do we think about that pricing strategy? Do you want to charge on the border to France, or do you want to charge once you've got to the UK? So there's a lot of topics around pricing that we have to think about. George, to go back to your sort of original point about powers, certainly this megawatt charging standard, this new connector which we're developing, is probably what we're going to need, and that's going to be future-proof for public charging. But with regard to a speed, it's relatively difficult to say, but I'm thinking up to 1 megawatt will generally be sufficient. Why? Because as we know, we've got that 45-minute break. Yes, we could bring it down to, say, half an hour, maybe even quicker if required. On the flip side, you also have to think about the sizes of batteries that we will be expecting in the market. And it's a balance between having those sizes of batteries and the charging time. But I think there was one question about in the chat, which I semi-answered, that this new standard will have a lot higher potential, going up to 4.5 megawatts. I think that is generally not on the table and not required. So I think about up to 1 megawatt will be sufficient.
Great, thank you very much. Well, amazingly, our time has evaporated. I don't know quite where it's got to, but thank you everybody very much for your contribution. It's been really insightful and a very interesting 90 minutes. So thank you for listening, everybody. Just a reminder, this recording of this session will be available. So if you want to listen again, go to mosttransport.co.uk and click on the webinar tab. And that's it from me, really. So I hope you all enjoyed this, and thanks for joining us. And see you at a Motor Transport webinar very soon.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Em.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Pleasure. Thank you very much, everybody, organizing this event. It was a great pleasure being here. Thank you very much. All the best.